from about the age of 11 or 12, I would wake up every Saturday morning and I would listen to our local radio station, and I would find a song that I really loved. There it is, number 89. So I would tune in the next week, waiting for it to go up. And, this week it's 87. Great. Then the next week, 92. And then it would be gone. you know? And I always figure, well, that's a song that's going to make a huge hit. And, the ones that sort of went up to number one, I just couldn't understand how anybody could be attracted to that. And it kind of led to some curiosity about myself. Am I really that weird?
Welcome to Jazz Therapy, where we explore the intersectionality of jazz, the psyche and psychoanalytic thought, spirituality, and consciousness. We have in-depth conversations with people from various walks of life, all of whom view their work as a service to humanity. Then we listen to jazz and discuss our thoughts, feelings, and reflections, which arise from hearing this incredible art form. I'm your host, Jessie Shapiro. This show is for entertainment and educational purposes only. If you or someone you know is feeling suicidal or in an emotional crisis, you can call or text the SAMHSA crisis line, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Association, through the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Simply call or dial 988 24/7, 365 days a year. My guest today is Larry Saidman. A resident of Edmonton, Canada, Larry has been a psychotherapist and counselor for 50 years and is now on the cusp of retirement. A music lover since childhood, Larry is also a broadcaster on the side. Larry has been involved in radio shows and podcasts for many years, among them a favorite show he hosted through Peach City Radio, now CFUZ, in Pentacon, Canada, and a program called Musical Therapy, where he played music that was an essential part of his own self-therapy, which he hoped to spread to others. Lately, jazz has become Larry's therapy, with his therapeutic focus being the generating of curiosity. Since 2017, Larry has been the host of the hit podcast, Discovering Jazz, the goal being for the listener and Larry to discover some of the mysteries of this amazing art form together. You can find his podcast on Apple Podcasts. Larry, thank you so very much for being here today.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor, Jessie.
Well, I thought the theme of today would be spirituality and broadcasting, and I guess a little bit of psychotherapy too, since we are both therapists. Mm-hmm. And I do really like quotes. So I thought I would just read a little quote to kind of set the tone for today, and then we'll just get into it.
Sure.
Okay. Did you ever stop to think that you are a spiritual and mental broadcasting station and that messages are going out from you on a daily basis? Even when you are asleep, you are emitting messages out into the universe which create your future. Of course, you know that everything moves in circles, so that means the message which you are broadcasting will come back to you. We are all broadcasting stations, whether we know it or not. Your thoughts, feelings, and emotions, faith and fears tend to make an imprint and shape your personal environment. In essence, you are constantly sending and receiving and creating your own reality. Constance Arnold.
That's a wonderful sentiment. Yeah, I like that.
So with that, I thought I just might dive right in and ask you, what is spirituality for you, and what does that look like in your life?
I'm sort of the epitome of non-religious in every respect. I've always found it astounding that people have sort of labeled me as a very spiritual person because it's never been the way I've seen myself. So I guess part of the spirituality is trying to find that out. It's almost like, just like I'm in my podcast, I'm exploring the mysteries of personal preference in music and taste, um, I'm also trying to understand, my own spirituality of what it is that makes my own life meaningful. So I guess if I had to think of a word related to spirituality, my own spirituality, it would be wonderment. I'm always wondering, and curiosity is the big part. So that's why I say in my podcast, it's me and the listener discovering jazz together, because I'm assuming that most of us are probably on a similar plane, although I don't know. I don't know who my listeners are really, for the most part.
Well, I think I'm hearing that sort of lifelong learning is part of it, and just continuing to see how things unfold.
Exactly. Yeah, very much so. I have no idea what's going to unfold.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what connection you might see between spirituality and jazz.
Well, I did in one of the interviews that I did quite a while back with it was a drummer and choir leader named Brian Tate. He talked about how jazz in improvisation is saying yes. You know, he compared it a lot to sort of even in theater sports, where somebody puts out something and your job is to work with it, not to negate it. So that's how I see jazz. I mean, I can listen to John Coltrane, for example, and then there's a part of it that sort of goes way beyond my own intellectual understanding. Yet there's something also that's really hitting me. And it's hitting me in many different ways. There's some negative judgments, there's some positive judgments, and there's just this wonderment. Well, what is it that he's doing? And then learning how, Coltrane was also very much a mathematician. And, the amount of logic that he used within his music. And, that kind of puts together the whole thing of logic and spirituality. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, Jesse. And sometimes I really appreciate it. Sometimes it leaves me cold. And whichever way it does, that's fine. That's totally okay. And it doesn't keep me from wanting to listen to more.
Mm. Well, that's really spiritual, right? In the sense that you're sort of saying whatever arises and whatever is going to be present, I will accept and just be with.
That's right. And work with it. And, again, I don't want to say no to any of it, which is very difficult for me because, psychologically, I'm a fairly arrogant person. And working with my own arrogance is always one of my biggest challenges. So, there's this combination of extreme arrogance and extreme humility that have to find a way of living together.
Okay, well, I want to ask a follow-up question about that. Tell me about just you observing these parts of yourself and how you work with your arrogant part and the part that's very much rooted in humility.
Well, I laugh at my arrogant part, at least when I notice it. I can get into discussions with people and have really strong, very definite opinions, and I love it when somebody calls me on it.
That makes sense. One thing I wanted to ask you that I've asked everyone so far on this podcast is what they do when they get really stuck or triggered. That's kind of the psychological word. However, this word that I like is from Pema Chodron. Do you know who she is?
I do.
Yeah, you do. And she's also up in Canada. She's in Nova Scotia, I believe, although I'm not sure if she's Canadian or American, but I know she's in Nova Scotia. So she talks about the word shenpa. So I'm just going to read you this little blurb and then I'll have you respond to it. So the Tibetan word for this is shenpa. It is usually translated attachment, but a more descriptive translation might be, quote, hooked. When Shenpa hooks us, we're likely to get stuck. We could call Shenpa, quote, that sticky feeling, end quote. It's an everyday experience. Even a spot on your new sweater can take you there. At the subtlest level, we feel a tightening, a tensing, a sense of closing down. Then we feel a sense of withdrawing, not wanting to be where we are. That's the hooked quality. The tight feeling has the power to hook us into self-denigration, blame, anger, jealousy, and other emotions which lead to words and actions that end up poisoning us. So, Larry, what do you do when you get shenpod, like when you get really annoyed or really frustrated or just working through a tough moment in your life? Like what do you do spiritually and psychologically to get yourself through those moments?
Wow. That's a tough one, Jesse. Let me kind of reflect back on some of the times. I've certainly had some very tough moments. I know one thing I don't do is get into sort of a place of mindless escapism. I find it, for me, that creates a lot of distress. You know, I mean, when we had one tragedy in our life many years ago, I found that where, other people involved were very much wanting to find sort of nice escapes, mindless TV comedies or, these sort of very positive, but not really real affirmations. They really upset me when I got into that. It's like I almost needed more angst. And it's like I needed to take it further, to let it hit me hard. So I think I do that with a lot of things that kind of come up that are really difficult. I tend to want to lean right into them rather than lean away from them.
Wow, that is so deep. And Larry, I think I do a little bit too much escapism myself. So this is really good to hear. You're inspiring me. And what you said, that reminds me of one of the categories of emotional listening that I created. Emotional dwelling. And I got this concept from this American psychoanalyst. His name is Robert Stolorow. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but
No, I
he's part
haven't.
of the interpersonal school for like contemporary psychoanalysis. And basically, I went to this workshop that he did a lecture about, and he was talking about this concept of emotional dwelling. And he told this story about his father. And he said his father was blind in one eye and he had to go have a cataract surgery on the other eye. And his father was very anxious about this surgery. And he said a bunch of people in his family were trying to tell his father, oh, it'll be fine. You'll be able to see, and you're going to feel great. And his dad was so upset. Nothing was helping. And then he said, I finally said to my dad, Dad, you're going to be effing psychotic until you have this surgery and then you'll settle down. And he said, and then my dad settled down. It was like he needed, yeah, he's like, he needed somebody to really be right there with him in all of that anxiety and just completely mirror and be there. And that's what he coined emotional dwelling, which is like completely being there with somebody. And I know you know that as a therapist as well. And this is exactly what you're talking about, and being in a really tough moment of just completely being there with all of the emotions.
Right. Yeah. And for the last 10, 11 years, most of the work that I'd been doing therapeutically was through e-counseling. So through email, and it was like a narrative. So that was very much reflects what I would often need to do in, reading a client's texts would be to very much mirror what was going on with him or her. So, I realize that that's something I also do with myself. And I think I do it within the podcast too, and in the music that I select.
Say a little more about that, how it comes out in the music you select. I was going to ask about that.
Well, I don't know if I can. I mean, I'll have a specific topic. Like, for example, I did do a couple podcasts. Your program is Jazz Therapy, and I did do a couple episodes called Jazz Therapy. That basically looked at how we use jazz, as and how music generally is therapeutic, and a lot of it does go along with that, the emotional dwelling that you're talking about. It's the mirroring of a topic, and they're not necessarily tunes that I like. That's the thing. It's you know I will go through a lot of the music that I play, and I don't like it, but I'm intrigued by it. There's something, and part of, again, my journey is to discover what it is that is intriguing me.
If you'd like to know more, you can visit my website at www.jazztherapy.com. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the states of California and New York. You can also check out my profile page on Psychology Today, which I'll leave linked below. I really like that concept, especially of what you just said about a lot of the times you don't necessarily like the music, and yet you're drawn to it. And that reminds me of what you described in terms of the way that you started to enjoy jazz is when you talked about finding the Nina Simone record of Porgy and Bess, which I've heard you tell this story a couple times now. And you said at first you really didn't like the music, and yet you were very drawn to it.
Yeah. And I could never figure that out. I mean, I heard this awful song on the radio. And it was her singing "I Loves You, Porgy," and I would have been about 12, I think. And for some reason, I would always follow the hit parade charts. So for some reason, though, I would always look to see where that song was on the charts, and watching it rise, watching it fall, and it almost became an obsession with me for a while. Waiting to see where they would play that song. Who can explain it, really? And of course, now I listen to it and I recognize how wonderful it is. But
well, I was going to ask now, when you hear it, like, what do you think it was about that it really brought up a strong reaction for you as a 12-year-old?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you talked about the emotional dwelling or the mirroring your mood. I mean, I was a kid with an incredible amount of angst. So, this tune and the way she sang it and the emotion within it, it was just mirroring sort of who I was and how I felt as a kid, and, what I was going through. And it didn't, like, you've got another category of emotional elevation to feel better. And I can't say that listening to it made me feel better. Well, maybe it did in a deeper way, but it was like somehow, and this would be totally unconscious, it was like it understood me.
Exactly. Well, when I first heard, I think it was probably this song or either Summertime. However, I didn't realize what an intense musical / opera this piece was by Gershwin. Like, the whole is very heavy. I didn't realize that until I finally saw the whole thing in production. Well, Larry, I wonder if you could tell us about the parallels between broadcasting and psychotherapy, since we also talk about service to humanity on this show, and your podcast is an amazing service to humanity. I feel like it's like going to graduate school to just fill in, my knowledge gaps in jazz. So I wonder if you could just talk about your two professions of broadcasting and being a psychotherapist.
You say graduate school. I think of it as undergraduate, actually.
Oh, really?
I mean, even though I've been doing this podcast now for a good 5 years, I just feel I know so little about the music. And, it's almost like I'm just a fraction of a step ahead of the people that I'm supposedly teaching. And I guess I feel that way with therapy too. Because I learn just probably more from the clients than they learn about me, or they learn from me. And I think it's sort of that way with jazz and with the music. I put it out, and even though I may not get that much direct response from the listeners, I think I'm always imagining how they might be perceiving it. It's interesting to speculate. I think I've lost your question, Jesse. Uh, I get on
Oh no,
tangents.
that was
Is that?
great. I
Oh,
love
okay,
tangents. And you know
okay,
what? I always say in psychotherapy to all of my clients, since the type of therapy I do is kind of psychoanalytically informed, that there's really no a right or wrong place to start, because everything that needs to get talked about will get talked about. It's all going to come out of our unconscious at some point. So a tangent is a tangent, but maybe it's really actually not a tangent. So I
right.
was just asking about the parallels between broadcasting and psychotherapy. And as I'm hearing you talk, I'm just again coming back to this theme of curiosity. And I wonder how that developed for you in your life in relation to broadcasting and then also therapy.
Well, I think it all again comes back to this curiosity that I've had all my life about my own musical tastes and even how it compares to others. Um, I used to joke that, in fact, I still joke. There's about the fact that if I really like your music, I really feel sorry for you, because that means for sure that it's never going to go anywhere commercially. So, my tastes were always just so different from everybody else's. I could never understand why everybody didn't love the stuff that I loved. I from about the age of 12, 11 or 12, I would wake up every Saturday morning and I would listen to our local radio station, CJCA, that had their top 93. And I would find a song that I really loved. Ah, there it is, number 89. So I would tune in then the next week, waiting for it to go up. And, oh, this week it's 87. Great. Then the next week, oh, 92. And then it would be gone. you know? And I always figure, well, that's a song that's going to make a huge hit. And, the ones that sort of went up to number one, I just couldn't understand how anybody, could be attracted to that. And it kind of led to some curiosity about myself. Am I really that weird? Am I really that sort of alienated and separated from everybody else? So it's been very rewarding doing this particular podcast. And while I don't have a huge amount of listeners, it, I get each podcast is pretty much assured of at least getting 500 hits, and that's fine. That's great. I'm not. I think that if I started getting any more, I would probably become overwhelmed. It would. I'd have to sort of redefine my whole sense of self if suddenly it became extremely popular. And at the same time, if nobody listened to it, then it would just reinforce that alienation, and I don't really want that either. So it seems to be at about the right place. So it's kept me doing it for 5 years.
Well, one thing I was curious about is just the course of music in your life and that being connected to just your passion. There's so many stories, in your podcast of just music being in your life and then you volunteering at music festivals and just like I wonder if you could talk about just music, your passion for music and what that has meant for you in your life and your career.
Hmm. that would be going back quite a few years, I guess. I think that passion developed. My mother was very passionate about music. She would have certain radio stations on, and mostly sort of easy listening or sort of crooners. And I just found a lot of those songs. I don't know why they hit me. I think I was haunted by a lot of it. She subscribed to the Columbia Record Club at the same time. And if you didn't say you didn't want a particular album, it would come. So she ended up getting quite a few, well, maybe not quite a few, at least a couple that she hated, and she would give them to me. Bela Bartok's Music for Strings, Percussion, and Celeste was the one that I remember hearing her playing it on the stereo, and it was like the music. I knew that music. I dreamed about it. It was the music that had been playing in at least one of my dreams. So when she gave me the album, I was quite thrilled, and it's still the Raphael Kubelik orchestra and his orchestra playing it. It's still something that haunts me to this day. I play it, and it just brings back so many memories of both of my dreams and of my childhood. So that's I don't know if that was a start. I also I guess the other thing in music is I took piano lessons as a kid. And I remember my brother started taking the piano lessons. He's about 3 years older than me. And I remember he was sitting at the piano with his music and trying to play something. I would have been about 3, I think, and he was playing it. And then he left, and I sat down on the piano and played the piece perfectly. I guess by ear mostly, although I thought I was reading the music, but really I was just reading the little fingering things. But, I think that's what sort of led my parents to realize that I had some kind of gift that was very different. And then shortly after, they discovered that I had perfect pitch, which is something that, one in a million people actually have. you know. Um, and then something happened when I turned, I think, about 50 or 55. Overnight, I lost the perfect pitch. I learned later by reading something by Oliver Sacks that wasn't uncommon, that happens at a certain age. And I had to totally redefine myself and my whole relationship to playing music. And maybe even listening to it too. I no longer heard it the same way. So in discovering jazz and listening to jazz, I now have to focus on the relationship between the notes rather than the absolutes. And it's quite a learning curve, and nobody who hasn't gone through that experience would probably understand how profound that is, having to relearn. It would be like if all of a sudden you looked at a green shirt and it looked red to you, and you had to redefine your whole sense of color.
It's so disorienting. It's probably hard to even describe what is it like hearing a piece after you lost the perfect pitch, because I heard that episode, I listened to it, like how your whole entire experience of music changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Because it could be pretty devastating. Like that's a big loss, Larry.
it is, but it's also a gain. That's the thing, and that, I guess, when you're talking about the whole spirituality thing, it really is. It's how we find the gains in any kind of loss. So, the gain for me is suddenly realizing the value of relationship generally. So it's being able to, when I'm talking with somebody, it's not there's me and there's not that other person. What there is, that there's a whole thing going on in between. It's I don't even know how to describe it, but it's there's gaps, there's connections, there's all sorts of things. And that's, I think, happens in music too. There's so many gaps in my listening experience. And then suddenly that gap will turn into a connection. And then the connection will be gone, will be disappeared. And, there's those absolutes or those gaps again. And it's just all part of the reality. And it's exciting.
It is. Well, I love that in the tragedy of losing your perfect pitch, that there was the benefit you're saying of focusing more on relationships. And it reminds me of something my friend David would say to me often, which is that each moment is a birth and a death. And that's kind of that idea that you were speaking to of like, there's a loss of something and then there's a birth of something else that emerges.
Yeah.
And finding the beauty of connection in relationships as well. It's also very therapy-esque, I guess, just because there's us and the client, and then there's the third field that is created. And there's a whole theory in psychoanalytic therapy called like inner subjectivity. And that's exactly what it's talking about, of like what is co-created between you and I. Even right now in this conversation, there's you in Canada and me in California, and then the field of what we're creating in this conversation.
Yeah. And, the important part of that comes with that is a trust. It's a trust that, and I guess that's the spiritual part. It's a trust that there will be some, I guess I could say the word meaning out of it, even if the meaning ends up being like a recognition of the meaninglessness. I don't know if that contradiction makes any sense, but that somehow, something is going to come out of it. And I think that there's a beautiful connection there in terms of my relationship to jazz. So it's even the music that I get nothing out of. There's the realization that there is a mystery there. There is a meaning. And I might discover it someday, or maybe I never will. And that's okay. Either way, just knowing that it's there and trusting that it's there seems to be I guess, the spiritual part. So the music that I play, somehow it reflects the theme, and I try to describe how it reflects the theme. But my description of how it reflects a particular theme is going to be probably totally different from what other people are going to see.
I really love what you just said about trust and just allowing. And I feel like you said something that I really needed to hear, because oftentimes, Larry, I feel like if I'm trying to make a decision about something, or just even today, like figuring out what songs I was going to play and just like figuring out what I'm going to do, I feel like I have so much internal grasping of like, oh, I have to make it happen now. And I have to like have this tight control over things. And you're really just speaking to kind of allowing life to just unfold, like allowing things to be there. And sometimes you like it and sometimes you don't. And that's okay. It's just right there.
Yeah, it's allowing, and at the same time, um, taking responsibility. Responsibility being that ability to respond. And the reality is that I do have an ability to respond to whatever I hear, whatever I say, whatever other people are saying. So it's not that I'm abandoning all responsibility.
You were cracking me up on one of your podcasts I was listening to, Larry. It was one, I can't remember which episode, but you were talking about this opera singer that did a crossover into jazz, and it was
Right.
I think it was like a 1960 or 61 recording. And after you got off, you played the song, and you were like, "Well, there were some pretty nice moments in this song, and there were some pretty terrible ones."
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. I don't even remember who the opera singer was now. But yeah.
I think one thing that I'm really learning from you, not just today, but even in hearing your body of work, is just that your gentle, authentic manner comes out. And it's really refreshing to listen to you, because I just hear that you're yourself up there. And I think that invites me and the audience just to be more ourselves as we hear your music too, and just your show. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I think I try to present more of my humble self rather than my arrogant self when I'm doing those programs. Every once in a while, the arrogance will seep through, I'm sure.
Well, we'll have to keep you in check for the rest of today, Larry, just just to make sure. Well, before we get to the jazz, because we're just about ready to move there, one thing I was curious about is how you got into psychotherapy. Like, just with your love of broadcasting and music that started so young as a child, you could have easily gone into music. So, how did you, with these forks in the road, become a therapist?
Well, I'll tell you the story that I tell people. I don't know if it's true, but elements of it are true. And the story that I tell is that when I first went to university, I put down music as my major. At that point, I just wasn't a good enough keyboardist or piano player to actually go into a bachelor of music.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just majoring in music. Then fairly quickly I realized that a major in music means nothing. I mean, it's kind of bizarre. I mean, am I going to be a musician or not? So I had two minors at the time. There was philosophy and psychology, and I didn't know what. I decided I'd make one of them my major. So I flipped the coin, and it turned out psychology. So here I am. The truth, mind you, is I don't think I actually did flip the coin, but that's what I tell people anyway. It sort of makes a good story, and I might have, how memory is.
Well, so then after that, I mean, we know you were curious about music, and there's had to be some kind of a curiosity about people, because then you had to go on and get some more training, obviously, to become a therapist. So what happened next?
I just ended up, I think, going to a lot of psychotherapy groups, the old tea groups of the 60s and things like that, and learning more and more about myself, and learning more and more that really I wasn't God's gift to therapy or to understanding of the human condition. And, I think a lot of my arrogant self really showed during those days. And I think that it became almost the duty of the facilitators to humble me. And they worked very hard at it, and they were successful. So it developed more of my curiosity about finding myself and learning about myself. And I think even earlier than that, I think like many kids, felt very alienated as a kid, and I always believed that everybody else, of course, knew more than me. They were more popular than me. They just sort of had all the things that I didn't have, and one day. I guess it was first year university when I took my first psychology course. I had a eureka moment, and I suddenly realized, and I had no clue of this before, I suddenly realized that other people also had those struggles. Other people also felt inadequate. So my response wasn't compassion, it was a desire for revenge. So I figured what better way to do it than learn all about people and human nature so I could get back at them.
That's funny. That's that that mischievous side that we have heard about, Larry, of you coming out. Well, that's really interesting that you had some experiences in group therapy. Group therapy is intense. It's different than individual therapy for sure. I did the group psychotherapy training program at the Psychotherapy Institute in Berkeley, and as part of that program, we had to be in a group process, like a therapy group for a whole year with all the other people in the program who were all therapists. And it was intense, Larry. It was very intense. I really had to push myself to show up because I'm a lot more of a kind of one-on-one type of person. And I did learn a lot about myself for sure. It was uncomfortable. Well, let us get to the jazz. Now it's time to listen to some jazz. Due to copyright laws, we cannot play the music on air at this time. I respect copyright laws and the incredible artists who created the jazz we listen to, as without them, we would have no jazz. I will leave links to the songs we listen to so you can pause and listen to the songs along with us. It is my dream to someday grow this podcast to the point where I can eventually host it on a major streaming platform which owns the right to play music, so we can all have the communal experience of listening together. Until then, please bear with me. In preparing for today, I emailed you and I was like, okay, we're going to probably listen to the music of Duke Ellington because your episode's coming out the week of his birthday. However, you suggested a song, and then I listened to each of your podcast episodes about your own jazz roots. And since today we're already doing something different with the format and making it shorter, I was like, why don't we listen to some songs that have been very important in your life and upbringing?
Really excited, wondering what it is you're going to play.
Oh, me too. Me too. And I also just want to say I always do a lot of research for my podcast, and I'm sure you do too. And doing the research for yours, Larry, was super fun because I just listened to as many podcasts as I could. Like whatever I was doing, walking, gardening, dishes, like I was listening to your podcast. So it was really fun to research it. All right. So our first song that we are going to hear is one that you talked to me about that was very meaningful to you growing up. It's a Frank Sinatra song called How Little We Know.
Right.
Is that right?
Well, it's actually the real title is How Little It Matters.
How little it matters. Okay. So how little it matters. And so normally I set the song up and introduce it and everything, Larry, but maybe you could do that. So this is from his album Sinatra's Sinatra.
Right. Yeah, that was actually a re-recording. I think he might have recorded it earlier. Don't quote me on that, but that was where I heard it, was on the Sinatra album.
Okay, and this is like
It'd be the early 1960s. It's when he first started his Reprise label, and most of the songs on that album are sort of re-recordings of tunes he had done earlier on Columbia.
Okay, cool. So we're going to listen to this song and I'll screen share it, and then we will talk about our reactions after. Okay. Well, Frank Sinatra at his jubilant best there. So Larry, tell me about what comes up for you just hearing this song, what category you'd put it into. I know you have a lot to say, and we want to hear it.
I actually don't have that much to say, Jesse, because the song seems to say it all. I mean, I'm just thinking that the thought of doing that song actually came to me after you first contacted me. It's not necessarily something that haunted me as a kid like some of the others do. It's more the present, like right now. It really is. It's sort of about that curiosity without having to have a huge investment in the results. It's a process of the curiosity and being okay with not knowing. And the way Frank sings it, I mean, this is just classic Frank Sinatra in his, his pauses, his phrasing, And I'm not always a huge Frank Sinatra fan. Sometimes he can be simply awful, but here I think he's just right on. As for whether it's jazz or not, I don't know. I mean, it's written by, I think, Carolyn Lay, Broadway composers. I don't think it was for a Broadway show, but I could be wrong. But it's a type of music that, and a lot of jazz people have done that particular tune. I think I've mentioned some of them before. But whether it's jazz or whether it isn't jazz, to me, doesn't matter. The fact is that it swings and it's got edge, and that to me is what defines great great music, the energy and the edge.
I love what you said about being comfortable with just the process and letting things unfold, just the unknown. There's a quality that Frank Sinatra has when he is singing this song that like he just is like, F it, I don't care. Like, I don't know. And like, he's had a couple drinks. He's at that phase of just like, I'm just letting it all go. That's kind of the vibe I get. Like, he's so, yeah, almost like tongue in cheek about it, the way he's singing it here.
Right. Yeah. It's like that combination of arrogance and humility that kind of go together.
They do. And you know what? Frank Sinatra has that. And sometimes it works. And then other times, you're right, there is kind of like a smarmy quality that comes across in some of his songs. What category or categories of emotional listening would you put this song into?
Well, I guess right now, as I listen, it would be mirroring, the mirroring my mood. Um,
So, emotional dwelling.
yeah, I guess the emotional dwelling probably would be the closest one. Let me look at some of the others here that we've got. Well, I had suggested another one as being emotional turbulence, and I think there is a turbulence there when he talks about the the power of the intermingling. It kind of hits you, and the whole thing of romantic love is always turbulent, even when it's good.
That's very true. It is very turbulent. I think this song also just reminds me in the title of our unconscious mind and how what a huge part of us that still is. Even being therapists and having insight, as you pointed out, we still have to continue to have an attitude of curiosity towards life and towards ourselves because there's so much that we don't know about ourselves. I did in like the last 6 months some expanded consciousness journeys, like with psychedelic medicines, plant medicines. And Larry, if I did not believe in the unconscious before then, which I absolutely did, I absolutely do now because
Oh,
I was just
wow.
astounded at how much stuff I thought I knew about myself, but there was still more that I could see I was not totally being honest. So I really like that.
Interesting.
I would put this song in the category of emotional reverie, I think, because for me, it generates more reflection. So,
Okay. Yeah, that certainly fits.
okay. All right. Well, let's go to our second song. And this song is a song that you talked about on one of your episodes about your own roots in jazz that you saw while watching a movie. And you said that this song really stayed with you and continues to kind of haunt you. And this song is A Taste of Honey by Lenny.
Oh, yes.
Is it Bro?
Oh, Lenny Bro's version,
Lenny
right?
Bro.
Yeah,
Lenny Bro.
instrumental. Yeah, he was actually originally American, but at the age of 9, he moved up to Canada with his parents, who were country and western singers, and he was their backup guitarist. And he liked to play jazz, and his father would actually beat him for playing jazz.
Oh,
And
wow.
he became. I mean, he's a legend in jazz guitar. People listen to Lenny Bro and they say, "Well, he's double recorded this." Well, he hasn't. It's all just him. Just what he could do with the guitar was amazing. And this particular tune, written by Bobby Scott, um, and it just fitted so beautifully in the movie. Did you ever see the movie, A Taste of
No,
Honey?
okay. So
With
what was the movie was called The Taste of Honey.
Yeah, starring Rita Tushingham, and it was about a young girl who, at the age of 12, ends up pregnant. And she has a rather emotionally abusive mother, and she's just struggling to to make what she can out of her life. And I saw it. I guess I would have been about 12 or 13, and I was just very touched by it. And somehow that particular song put itself into my memory, and I don't know why.
Well, let's hear it. And maybe as you hear it again, you'll have more insights or reflections that come to you. So, okay, A Taste of Honey by Lenny Bro. So that is just some fine guitar playing. I really had to listen to this song a couple times to absorb how intricate and amazing his fingering is. I don't have like the technical knowledge to explain it, but it's really amazing. It's really incredible.
Well, aside from the technical knowledge, there's just listening to it this time. I get something probably haven't really recognized before, and that is like some people listening here might recognize that as it was a hit in the early 1960s by Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, and when they did it, it was kind of almost like jaunty in its swinging, sort of almost Latin, very happy reflection of it, And I think now, I don't think Herb Alpert ever saw the movie. I suspect that Lenny Bro did, because the tension that, aside from all the technical stuff, just the tension that he puts into that tune reflects so much, and the wondering of how that poor young girl was going to make it through life, what was going to happen to her. The way he plays it just seems to me to really reflect that.
As I'm hearing this song, and I've heard it a couple times now again, I get this feeling of like maybe I'm on a road trip and I'm hearing this music and I feel an invitation to kind of reflect more deeply on my life, like where is it going? And it's not a completely ominous, like foreboding in this tune. It's not like a sad vibe necessarily, and it's not also jaunty as you were mentioning that other version is. It's more like, okay,
Right.
what's going to unfold? There's so much richness all here, and like literally maybe even pregnancy with possibility. Like there's, you can feel that here in this song too.
That's right. And if I remember right, even at the end of the movie, you still don't know exactly what's going to happen to her. It's like you think you have this fear that she's going to just live the same life that her mother lived. But you also know that she has a lot of resilience, and maybe she won't.
Hmm. Well, and again, that's the theme of today is curiosity and embracing uncertainty. That's what's evolved. So I love that. Okay, so what category would you put this into?
Well, I think it maybe the tone setting, emotionally creating a vibe.
And what's the vibe?
Well, the vibe being that I guess that tension, the tension that
Mm.
comes with knowing some things and not knowing others.
I like that. I'm going to put it in the category of emotional reverie, and I'm going to borrow yours and say it's also tone setting because of the tension, like you said too.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go to our third song. And Larry, I thought this would be a little bit of a gambler's choice because, again, in listening to your podcast, I learned that one group and one reason that you're still really interested in modern jazz today is because of Makeke, which is
Oh,
a Canadian all female band that I discovered through you. And they just came out with a new album last year called Playing with Fire. And so I listened to the album and there was a lot of really cool tracks on there. And I thought maybe I would just let you choose which one you would like us to hear and then I can get it for us.
since we're on spirituality, maybe a God unknown might be a good one.
You want to do that one?
Sure.
Okay. We're going to do, so this is A God Unknown by Jane Bennett and Makeke from their 2023 album Playing with Fire. And Larry, you can tell us more about this group after we hear this song too.
Okay, sure.
A God Unknown by Makeke, a group I learned about from you. So, Larry, wow, tell us about your experience of hearing this song.
Well, this is a group that I don't think you can fully appreciate until you've seen them live.
Mm.
The way they work together as a unit is incredible. You know, uh, the harmonies, all of them make such a strong contribution. It's almost like there really is no ego there. Uh, and listening to it this time, I realized just how much that freedom to do all that is driven by the amazing drumming of Yissi Garcia.
Mm.
She's really quite something. It's the way she just sets the rhythm so they can do all that, and she's the only one in the group that doesn't sing.
Mm.
um, the vocals, when you sort of see them doing it, you really see just how much they're really all you know on the same page. And even the Danny Olano's piano solo there. There's She doesn't do anything fancy in that. Nothing weird. No, going way all over the place. But it's just so tasteful, and it just melds in so beautifully. So yeah, that's I guess the main thing I can say about that, and it seems to really show up in that tune.
I totally felt that too. Just their coalescence as a group, how they work together and their voices. And also just this song brought for me like a feeling of feeling completely free, maybe just like dancing around and kind of like just surrendering yourself to whatever is happening, like the joy of the moment might be surrendering oneself to God, just being completely present with just kind of like letting oneself go. That's kind of the energy that this song reminds me of.
Yeah, I can certainly see that. Yeah.
I would put it in the category of emotional galvanization. What about you?
Yeah, I think that's a good one. The inspiring to take action, also experiencing something new. I would put there in the
Mm,
innovation. But related
yeah.
to that galvanization, I think it's these women. Most of them were, they did play in various groups within Cuba, but most of the time, I think Jane Bennett ended up sort of finding a lot of them. They were sort of sitting in the audience during one of the Havana jazz festivals while their boyfriends were up on stage playing. And Jane sort of said, "Well, why aren't you there playing? Why aren't you doing this?" And they just kind of shrugged. It like wasn't something they were galvanized to do, I guess. So she decided, hey, let's do something with these amazingly talented Cuban women, and she funded them, many of them, to come up to Toronto. They stayed at her house, and she basically got the group together. They've been through a lot of different personnel, but all the personnel that have left have done they then form their own groups. Like there's another group called Ocan who are getting pretty big. They've been nominated for Junos here up in Canada, and they were two members of Makeke who went off on their own.
Oh, that is so cool. I was going to ask also just I'm curious about this group and you said they are really what make you excited about jazz today. And if you could tell us a little bit about that before we wrap up.
Well, again, it's that whole thing of what I talk about jazz and improvisation as saying yes. Here are some, women who are saying yes to their own connection and enhancing that connection, and yes to their own empowerment.
Hmm. That's such a beautiful answer, Larry. That's like perfect. That's so lovely.
Well, thank you.
Just before we say goodbye and depart, do you feel like there's anything that we didn't cover today that feels important, or just any final thoughts on the overlap of spirituality and broadcasting and therapy? We started this show with the quote about basically how all of us are constantly broadcasting to the world in one way or another.
Well, there's hundreds of things that we haven't covered that I would like to cover, but I can't think of any of them right now. But I'll tell you, 5 minutes after we
There's some things.
finish, I'll think of them all.
Yes. Oh, I know one thing I was just curious about is, and I was going to weave this in earlier. However, just you have recorded like over 300 episodes, Larry, which is so amazing on your podcast. And I'm curious about how creativity comes to you and you get ideas for your show and just how you tap into your creativity, which is also related to spirituality, of course.
Well, when I get up in the middle of the night and have a thought, I immediately go onto my computer and I have a thing of possible ideas for programs, and I just throw it on there. And most of them are still there for many years, but it sort of provides ideas for you know for programs, just going to that list of possibilities. And then a lot of them just come spontaneously from one song. I'll listen to one tune I play, and for example, I've got one idea of doing one on ensemble work, and that came through one of the podcasts. So I said, wow, I just love the way all those people are playing together. Wouldn't it be neat to just get one where the whole focus isn't on solos? I just finished the whole series on the jazz solos.
I listened to those. Those were cool too, by the
Yeah,
way.
they were interesting, but that was my thing of discovery, because I'm not generally that crazy about jazz solos and the whole thing around that. So I really wanted to understand what was it that excites people about certain jazz solos. And I'm not so sure I necessarily got any more information other than a couple of the solos that people said weren't very good, I thought were great. But, what was I saying? Yeah. But it then led to the thing, well, I'm much more interested in how they do all these things together as a unit, and the great ensemble work. So I will be doing a program at some point on that. And so now when I listen to a lot of jazz, I'm really listening for the ensemble work more so than the solos.
That's really cool. I also was thinking about how maybe your shift in perfect pitch to non-perfect pitch maybe helps you do that, since you were talking about how you're now listening to all of the different elements in a group rather than the totality of everything.
Yeah, it certainly could. I hadn't thought of that, but it's something to explore.
Well, Discovering Jazz is such an awesome podcast. I cannot recommend this podcast enough to everyone listening, because you will learn more about jazz and what you like, and just have a really good time while you are listening to it. So,
well, thanks so much for those kind words, Jesse. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much.
I really look forward to listening to your podcast too. It just sounds so exciting. Jazz therapy. It sort of combines two of my greatest passions in life. So, yeah.
Well, after your episode comes out, Larry, hopefully you can listen to it and give me some feedback so I can improve it and make it even better. So thank you again so much. Thank you for listening, reflecting, and being present with us today. Please leave us a review and comment, as we love feedback and aim to continuously improve and innovate, embodying the spirit of jazz itself. Jazz Therapy is edited and produced by Patricio Garcia. Sage Salmon is our social media coordinator. To connect with us, find us on Instagram and TikTok. Our email is info@jazztherapy.com. Check back next week for our next episode. May Jazz Therapy soothe your soul.